So before we ever step foot into the workplace, women bring with them this truckload of expectations. And that's in addition to the hefty expectations we have of ourselves. Now, these societal expectations, well, they supersede anything that our companies, our families, our governments, they are thousands of years in formation. And we operate, let's say, beneath the umbrella of this hefty set of beliefs and bias that surround us every day. Then we show up at work and we sit in high stakes situations every day and we navigate the unspoken and spoken expectations that the world has of us. So we're walking on, little, shall I say, this tightrope every day. And we navigate this delicate balance ongoing to both be accepted while also making some room for ourselves in this mix. Now, influencing on its own is really, really tough. But before you consider any of the dichotomies that are at play, boldness is, of course, encouraged, but don't be too loud. And be clever, but don't make it obvious. Got to be humble and you got to be supportive. Lead, but don't be overbearing because nobody likes that. And roll with those punches, take direction, accept change, be porous, but at the same time, for the love of God, be tough. And by all means, keep helping. We like that and we need that. We just don't want to hear about it too much. And we don't want to feel that you're helpless. It's hyperbolic, I know. Though maybe in some of it you feel a germ of truth. Now, we know that as women, we remain underrepresented at every stage of the corporate ladder and the pipeline, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. At the entry level, we represent just 48%. At the C-suite, 29%. And while we are moving in the right direction, surely, the gaps that exist for those of us in the workforce today as women operate beneath the umbrella of these realities. So data from leanin.org and McKinsey Institute, which does a study on women in the workforce, they still show that the dynamics that we face for women in meetings are just simply different. This is no judgment. This is what it is. So take the facts and then work within them. Because with nearly half of women being spoken over, that's a third higher than men. And those who are experts in their space, 40% of us, we report having our judgment questioned publicly. And there's also these different, what I'll call listening styles around intonation that make it even more difficult for women to break through. So it feels like harder. It's harder to be heard because it is. And the facts around that support us. And so think back to the last time that you brought something or someone pitched something to you, an idea, maybe it was a strategy, maybe it was a plan, but behind it was this layer of conscious thinking and unconscious filters that were simply at play. And these principles of persuasion are also at play when you show up as a woman at work to influence others. So let's keep them in mind, because these principles affect how people receive influence and how we also react to being influenced ourselves. Think of this as the human nature 101 on influence. Now, the first principle is all around reciprocity. We value equality and balance, and we don't like to feel like we owe other people things. Generally speaking, when people have these social obligations, we try to settle them. And as women, this is one of our highest persuasion levers going. And it often feels like we are programmed and built for this reciprocity. And as you consider this, look at it from both the perspective of you're influencing others on how reciprocity might be at play, but also in their response to you and how their actions are rooted in some desire of reciprocity themselves, because both affect your ability to influence and have impact. Now, scarcity is less of something, basically the less of something there is, the more people want it. From persuasion and influence perspective, this means that to increase interest in what you're selling, maybe you benefit from pointing out the availability of it. And by the way, this is also true when selling yourself and your own time and your value around that time, because there is never an infinite supply of that. Now, consensus, well, humans are social by nature, and we generally feel that it's important to conform to the norms or a social group. This means that when it comes to decision making, we often look around us, right, to see what's acceptable and what others are doing. Now, women rank high on this, higher than men. Maybe our societal expectations, our service ethic, our pleasing tendencies combined land us in this zone a little more than we'd like. What does it take to stand along an unpopular point of view that you perhaps believe in really strongly? And are you setting out to align with others who you see who are choosing what you may not want them, what you may want them to align on? Now, likability, it's a tricky one because it might seem totally obvious, but people are much more inclined to be influenced by people they like, and also less so from those that they don't. We pay compliments, we cooperate, we set out to collaborate more often with those we like. And it's also unfortunately true that we are much more likely to be influenced by those who feel similar to us. The world is diverse and our views are often also diverse. But how do we continuously look for those bridges between people and those strategy as a means to engender likeness, but also maintain our influence and impact? So how can we as women sort of lean into the differences, take more of the steps forward to someone who has a divergent view for the broader good? How can we look for this common ground, pay that compliment, and notice goodness? I think it's in us. And commitment and consistency. Now, people like to be consistent with their identity or sense of self-image. Consistency can become, in a way, a currency, let's say, to persuade people at work. She's dependable. You can always count on her to get the job done. This is one of those top drivers of persuasion for women. It often shows up as, well, if I just put my head down and do the work, eventually I'll get noticed and rewarded. Look how committed I am, is the subtext. Now, as women, we often downplay commitment and we believe that it will just be seen, right? We don't talk about it. So I ask you, should you? Could you? And if you did, would it increase your influence and impact? And could you do it in a way that would land well, that would be humble, that illustrates your competence as well as your confidence? For example, I have a proven track record of delivering complex projects. It's my pleasure to drive this one forward. Same sentiment, different words, and perhaps different impact. And finally, authority. Individuals who are authoritative or credible sources, knowledgeable experts in their fields are more influential and persuasive than those who aren't. We quote them. We ascribe value to them as influencers. We seek them out to elicit their views. We pull them onto panels. Why? Because authority and credibility are some of the core building blocks of trust. And when we trust people, more we're likely to involve them and follow them. And so I'd ask you, what are you the authority on? What's your niche, that secret sauce? And how can you develop your indispensable expertise and place value as you augment your influence? So just knowing these human behavior levers is important because they run as a current within all of us. Now, smart influencers know that, they master them, and they use them. But of course, we often hear influence is a bit of an art, but it's both an art and a science. So good influence considers context. It's situational. And to be an effective influencer, it's important you consider your influencing strategy alongside of the point of view and recommendation you're putting forth. Ask yourself, what's the right approach for this situation? What order do I need to do it in? Who needs to be involved before and in the moment? And is this dinner the right time to table an FTE ask for my boss? You'll see a poll pop up for you to weigh in on this. Now, influencing is both personal as well as personalized. It requires a really, really strong understanding of your audience and the story they bring into the room about you and about the subject before you even set into the room. It requires an understanding of their motivations, their approach, and to meet them where they are so that you can be heard. Good influence, well, it's deliberate and it's thoughtful and you need a plan. Though it succeeds when you have flow in the moment and you can navigate those shifts rather than come in with a lawyer and lay out all your arguments. You got to be open. And you have to ask yourself what has to be present and happen before the room to seed that idea, to gauge where people are at and unearth issues and to highlight the blind spots. That'll impact your influence. Now, I used to think and I used to feel that if I could just assemble all the facts, that the world would crack wide open and the truth would reveal itself. And when it did, the path forward would be so obvious, it would be indisputable. Now, I used to feel that I could just get all my facts loaded up, that I'd be useful and indispensable. I used to feel that facts were rather black and white. So I armed myself with many of them. I took jobs in places where I had access to a lot of them, not unlike the one I'm in. I used to believe that, in a way, being an analyst would make me more credible somehow and useful. And I used to feel that kind of the left brain, in a way, might trump the right, and that I could logic my way to most things that didn't make sense. I used to feel great satisfaction in being right, until I realized that none of this was actually how the world worked, that I was actually working through my insecurity and fears, and that my sense of self-worth and my desire to belong were at stake. So I was trying to find value and my value zone in a world and in the workforce. I still do. Not realizing or fully appreciating that my arrogance would be costly and exhausting for everybody, including me. And now I see, and I've learned from a few people, and I take that the vast majority of their cues in the room are actually the real feeder for how to be impactful. And I also see that this ratio of one's eyes and ears to mouth is purposeful, and perhaps the most important ratio I'll ever know. I learned that the hard way to allyship was important, and without it, I'd fast become an island. And that when I really aspired to build bridges between them was really the way to go. I learned that competition was a grind and really quite stressful and bad for my health. And I learned that so much of influence happens before I ever enter a room. I learned to get comfortable in the gray, in the black, and the white, and that the sober truth was that nobody really had the facts. And even if I had some, if people weren't willing to hear them, it was actually worse than not having them at all. So here I am, every day, surrounded by exceptional people, really bright people, brighter than I am, who know more than I do on any given subject, are faster, and I face a decision. And as a recovering writeaholic, I can honestly say to you that deep persuasion comes from a harmony inside, and that to persuade authentically, I needed to ask myself a few questions. And so I throw them out to you to consider. The first step was, what's really at stake? And is it useful for me to bring that into the room? What's really at stake for me? And should I bring that into the room? And what's the one thing that, if said, will trigger the heck out of me? And how can I respond and think about it in advance and respond with diplomacy? And finally, what's the worst thing that can happen? And what if I don't get that outcome? And will I live? And of course you will. And so it puts everything into context and perspective. And I'm still here. So maybe there's something in that. Now, as women, we employ adaptive strategies or persuasion personas, I'd suggest, at work that help us not only influence, but sometimes just survive and navigate. See if any of these ring true to you. These personas are often based on what I'll just call our ground truths, right? The basic stuff, because behaviors are learned in our homes. They're things we saw modeled and deemed acceptable or the norm, or past successes or learning. And one or all can be at play at any one time and be used to navigate. I'd like to introduce 4 archetypes of women at work, and you may recognize yourself in one or maybe all of them. And you may find a certain archetype works better for you in certain situations than others, and that's for you to decide. Now, the connector, first up. This is a role that I will just say is thriving on bridging ideas, people, and perspectives together. She ensures points of view are heard and understood in a meeting, in groups, and connectors are often actively listening and taking in information, asking questions, probing for understanding, creating space for the diverse voices in the room, and playing that back. And what was said for broader understanding. She's described often as being quite diplomatic, right? Empathetic, a good listener. You might hear her say things like this. I heard you, right? I think you're saying this. I think Susie has something to say. She's got her hand up, but we haven't gotten to her yet. If we went this direction, would it speak to all the stakeholders involved? In the workplace, she often makes time to get to know people, lean in on their backgrounds, and make time for networking in the process of influencing change. She will often have a series of meetings before the big meeting to lead everybody up and get them teed up for the right kinds of decisions. Now, she might be coming from a number of places, but maybe she's found herself in her life in positions of being that bridge, drawing people closer together. Maybe she's used this skill to survive or to thrive simply from where she's come from, and she's learned to navigate. Many, many glimmers with this type of role and archetype. She elevates understanding of people, ensuring voices are heard. She facilitates agreement. She brings a sense of inclusion and fairness into the room, and she ekes out those people blind spots that some of us miss. She can also amplify voices around the table who are less often heard. There's some shadows in the role because she can get stuck in that mediator role. She appears as though she herself may not have an actual point of view or her own opinions. She may get frustrated because she can't see how people can't add value in this mix, and she might feel a little placed upon. And she might find it hard to make tough decisions and run against the tide of the people and with the majority. Now in business, I'll call it that this shadow tax comes with connectors can be a bit tricky because getting buy-in and managing change is so often harder than we actually think. So people equate buy-in and hearing everybody's points of view sometimes as just taking too long and underestimating the need for both alignment of heart and head. And at times people may feel that it simply takes too long, right? And they can be wrongly judged as being not tough enough and having the ability to make those tough calls. Now, some ways connectors can break through on their influence. Acknowledge the views, but couple it with a bias for action. So it might look like this. It's important we find a prompt path forward to progress that is both practical and people focused. Or elevate and reposition your view. I believe that this is the best option because it aligns with business goals and what the team needs. That's the idea. Now, the navigator, next up on archetypes. Well, they like to drive and they aren't afraid to take the wheel. Many of us are like this, and the navigator thrives on driving for progress and decisions. She's assertive, she's confident, and she's hard driving. And she thrives in positions often where she can lead and will readily assume that leadership in situations where there are no assigned leaders. She's often seen as someone who can take charge of situations and brings value by moving them and inching them forward. She's comfortable being upfront, speaking first, making her views known, even in the face of adversity or disagreement, so long as things make progress. And she's inching towards a goal. She's typically fast to chime in. She feels comfortable making her views known and defending them and speaking up. You may recognize her. You'll hear from her in a meeting room because we don't get the chance. She'll say stuff like, we might not get the consensus on this, but it's important for us to move on. Can we find a common ground here? Why don't I whiteboard this so we can lay out a plan? And she might be coming from a number of places, but in my experience, I've seen a few things. She's found herself in positions where she is the navigator of people, teams, tasks. She's comfortable taking over. Maybe she's found herself in places of either vast disorganization or places where she could rise up. She saw that role modeled by others, and she learned that it was a way of cracking through. Now, glimmers of the navigator are many, but among them, bring clarity and focus and direction to others. Unblocking groups, moving us along, can take the unpopular and guide us towards decision. And you don't have to guess where she stands. Sometimes the shadow spots she can appear overbearing. She may leave less space for quieter voices in the room who are less inclined to speak up. And she may not always read how those around her are experiencing her leadership or how it's landing because she's busy. And she's busy in that moment guiding. Now, next up, we all need a little help from our friends. And this helper readily offers support for tasks, is quick to volunteer, and places great, great value in being able to assist others in big teams, in small ways. And she feels a great sense of, let me just say, contribution, right? To learn and assist, lead and assist. And she fills in these cracks. She has a strong, strong sense of duty and a broad sense of what's better for the team and what she can do in the role that she plays. You may recognize her or hear her say things like, I can take that. Or if no one's available, I'll take that shift. Or if you'd like a hand with that, I can lean in to help you. Or let me take one of that and I'll cover it off. Help, help, help. You hear that language ongoing. Now, one of the things that is interesting is where she might actually be coming from is she's found herself routinely in situations and perhaps in growing up, perhaps in family settings, in households, at work, where she's learned to be at the service of others. She's either been rewarded for it or it's expected of her. So she shows up in every situation wanting to help, and she's looking for that level of harmony that she provides in doing so. And so one of the things that's tricky, or it's great in that, is that the glimmers of the helper are really around helping to contribute to the broader good, and helping when others maybe don't want to do something, but things run smoothly because she's there and she is leaning in, filling those cracks. Shadow spots of the helper, they could also, from a personal perspective, just be overburdened with the needs of others. And they might not realize it until they build up and there are too many on her plate. She may struggle to set boundaries and say, nope, nope, not enough. Please, over to you. Or may feel taken advantage of over time. She may spend her time doing for others and not doing for herself. And there are indeed some societal shadows of this, that taxes that we have that come akin to this helper. The women, of course, been raised to help and care for others, and we've come to expect this at home and at work. Now, a woman demonstrating this capability and predisposition at work can be tricky because it can lead to inaccuracies around what she is actually fully capable of. So does she really have the experience and the leadership skills to take on the whole project on her own? I've only ever seen her help or assist, because people don't actually see the full slate of things that the helper's work is contributing to in the broader good. They realize what it is when she stepped out of the ring and stops helping, but in the ring, they're maybe not as aware. So they assume she might be too soft, that she's not capable, when nothing can be further from the truth. So some bias bridges and how to navigate the societal shadow and kind of negative tax for that helper. This will help people appreciate the value of your time, the scope of your work, and your boundaries. So maybe it's something like, I'm willing to take that aspect of the work on. I feel comfortable I can juggle it with all the other deliverables on my plate and do it well. Or I'll take this part I'll send over to you to do, and combined we can get it done. So I would demonstrate that help is actually leadership. Help is self-leadership as well as being at the service of a group. To ensure people appreciate you, that taking ownership of pieces of work is not just helping, it is not insignificant, and it contributes to the broader good. Maybe it's something like, this file is an important part of the project to ensure it goes well, and I'm willing to leave that. And now for some advice. The advisor thrives on providing accurate, useful information, data, and facts to the conversation to help shape decisions. She often uses an arsenal of information to direct focus to the right areas of need and course correct decisions. She invests a lot of time being prepared. She's got a bunch of information that she can bring into the room. And you might recognize her because she'll say things like, the financial results show an uptick in Q1, which is unusual from Q2. We need to look at why that is. Or it actually shows the effective results happen in month 4 versus month 3, that kind of concept. Now, this individual comes from maybe a place of fact finding. They've grown up in that space. They have a penchant for numbers, and there's lots of glimmers affiliated with this advisor, and they help ground people in the facts, no question. They can help debunk myths and help prevent you from going down rat holes. They can limit repeatable mistakes. Shadow spots might well be that they feel emboldened. I've experienced this. I feel emboldened by the facts, and I miss the subtle questions or cues that are needed to support actual alignment around those facts. I may assume that my job is done once the facts are provided, and therefore my value might appear less sustaining. Or in situations where there are no prior facts, God forbid, that is something we may struggle with. And so this individual might be coming from a place of being used to having information. Maybe they're from an engineering background, math, they like it, they're used to it. But some of the things that we may want to do in order to assist and help develop the shadow spots and the tax affiliated with this advisor, as well, there are many, many female advisors. If the advisor relies only on her fact delivery as the dominant currency of her value, depending upon how it is delivered and the sensitivity to those around her, she can be wrongly labeled as a know-it-all. And meanwhile, she's just trying to be helpful. And the way she's developing that help is through offering information. And so how do we bridge? How do we get to a greater watermark on that so that the individual advisor can be more effective? So look for the right moments to plant fact seeds in conversations. Timing's everything. This will help people absorb and see your information as useful, contextual, while not trying to point out where they're wrong. So you could say something like, that's a good point, John. One thing I may add to that is that we see customers tend to do this across the first 6 months of their tenure versus that. Or when we get to the point where we explore customer information, I have some interesting data that may help us. So make use of this yes and versus the no but, even if your facts run counter to the tide in the room. So 4 personas, food for thought, all great, upside in every single one of them. You may well have a tendency or a prime or a secondary approach, but great influence is all about bridging between ideas and people. So how will you use your powerful influence to drive great awareness and shape your impact? And when we thread it all together, we have this backdrop of influences from our cultural origins to the families we're part of. Then we're soaked in society, navigating the drivers of persuasion, trying to be likable, trying to be consistent, and responding to others in kind. And this leads to a set of those personas. And we put them on like a good suit and we walk bravely into the world and we set out to have impact. These are glimmers and there's shadows around all of it and every single persona, alongside our deliberate choices around how we influence and how we bridge the gap between us and our audience with skill. And this detail will come to you as part of the post-mail pearls of wisdom that will follow this session so that you can use it day in and day out to help you be more effective.